Hello and welcome to my Disability History Month series. You can find the 2 other videos in the links down below. They're going to be coming up another live stream which is going to be about Christmas and disabilities, which will be next Friday, and in 2 weeks time I'll be doing another profile of a famous disabled person. Can you guess who it is? Today I'm going to be talking about by far the most requested disabled person to profile from my Twitter. And you can find the link to my Twitter in the description. Also subscribe, also join the Kellgren-Fozard club. Also, you should really eat sugar-free ice cream. It's actually really nice. With Helen Keller, I cannot say Keller. Oy. One of the most famous disabled people to date, the popular narrative of Helen Keller is a classic story about triumphing in the face of adversity. It emphasises individual determination over political and social action, but in reality, she had a strong commitment to socio-economic justice, which she saw as instrumental to improving the lives of people with disabilities. Helen was an American author, political activist and lecturer. She was the first deaf and blind person to earn a college degree, and she wrote 12 books. But again, a lot of people have a very simplified understanding of her. As one of my viewers, Rebecca Castro, pointed out, she's thought of as either a helpless little girl who was saved by the miracle worker Anne Sullivan, or a noble advocate who overcame her deaf blindness to write books and give speeches. Like all people, the reality of her life is nuanced. Although, yes, Keller did achieve a lot and progress both disability rights and awareness, she was also a eugenicist who believed that children with learning disabilities and deformities should be left to die. Helen was born a perfectly healthy child on June 27, 1880 in Alabama. Her father, Arthur Henry Keller, had served as a captain in the Confederate Army. Her mother, Catherine Everett Keller, was the daughter of a Confederate general, and one of Helen's Swiss ancestors was the first teacher for the deaf in Zurich. Keller reflected on this coincidence in her first autobiography, stating that there is no king who has not had a slave among his ancestors, and no slave who has not had a king among his. However, at 19 months old, Helen contracted an unknown illness, described by doctors as an acute congestion of the stomach and the brain, which may have been either scarlet fever or meningitis. Although she survived, the illness left her both blind and deaf. She recalled in her autobiography that she felt as if she lived in a dense fog. Although popular fiction writes her that way, she was not entirely alone. By the age of 7, Keller and her family had over 60 home signs. A home sign, by the way, is a gestural communication system developed by a deaf person, usually a child, to communicate with the hearing people in their family who don't know sign language. 90% of deaf children are born to hearing families, and there is a great disparity among families when it comes to learning full sign language. In many cases, only the deaf child will learn full sign language, and thus there develops a few gestures that help communication. Home signs can also be slang, so it's possible for a fully deaf family or even friend group to have a few signs that don't make sense outside of their circle. My wife and I have a lot of home signs that we use to communicate. Because if you're just joining us, hi, I'm deaf. I'm also blind in one eye, but I tend to forget about that because the other one works perfectly. Slight tangent, but American Sign Language is actually a blend of Home Sign, Old French Sign Language, Martha's Vineyard Sign Language, and Plains Indian Sign Language. You're a melting pot, much like the British Sign for the US. Helen later wrote that she found it easiest to communicate with the 6-year-old daughter of the family cook, who understood her signs and who she used to boss around. Like all children, the plasticity of her nature meant that she had learned to live with her disabilities, even though she struggled to communicate. She had no cognitive impairments, and she was intelligent enough that she learnt to tell who was walking through the house from the vibrations of their footsteps. Helen's family believed it would be impossible to educate her until 1886, when her mother read an account in Charles Dickens' American Notes of the successful education of another blind and deaf woman, Laura Bridgman. An ear, nose and throat specialist in Baltimore referred them on to Alexander Graham Bell, yes that one, who was working with deaf children at the time. More on him later. Bell helped them to contact the very school that Laura Bridgman, Dickens's blind and deaf girl, had been educated at, the Perkins Institute for the Blind. Rather than send Helen away to the school, a former student, Anne Sullivan, herself visually impaired, moved to the Kellers' home to become Helen's instructor and later her companion. Helen forever referred to the day Anne arrived as my soul's birthday, and they were friends for 49 years, although she wasn't very happy when Anne first arrived. The first few weeks were tempestuous. Helen hit, pinched and kicked her teacher, even managing to knock out one of her teeth, which takes a lot of force. Anne had brought a doll as a present for Helen and tried to use it to teach the little girl to communicate by spelling D-O-L-L into her hand. However, this just really frustrated Helen, as she did not understand that every object had a word uniquely identifying it. Anne tried again with a mug, but Helen just broke the mug. Eventually Anne gained control by moving with the girl into a small cottage on the Kellers' property, away from other distractions. A month later, the breakthrough came, when Helen realised that the motions her teacher was making on the palm of her hand as she ran water over it symbolised the name for water, W-A-T-E-R. Writing in her autobiography, The Story of My Life, which really could have had a more imaginative title, Helen said, "I stood still, my whole attention fixed upon the motions of her fingers. Suddenly I had a misty consciousness as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, and somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew that W-A-T-E-R meant the wonderful cool something that was flowing over my hand. The living word awakened my soul, giving it light, hope, and setting it free." Helen then exhausted Anne by demanding the names of every other familiar object in her world. Oh, God damn it! The light's gone! Through patience and firm consistency, Anne had finally won the child's heart and trust, a necessary step to Helen's education. In May 1888, Helen began attending the Perkins Institute for the Blind. In 1894, Anne and Helen moved to New York to attend the Wright Hummerson School for the Deaf, I think I said that right, and to learn from Sarah Fuller at the Horace Mann School for the Deaf. In 1896, they returned to Massachusetts, and Helen entered the Cambridge School for Young Ladies, before gaining admittance in 1900 to Radcliffe College of Harvard University. 4 years later, at the age of 24, Helen graduated, becoming the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Ever. It's a big deal. She was determined to communicate with others as conventionally as possible, and so learnt to speak, spending much of her life giving speeches and lectures on aspects of her life. She became proficient at using Braille and reading sign language with her hands. She also learnt to hear people's speech by reading their lips with her hands, which, if you saw the first live stream in this series that I did with my lovely wife, you'll know that's what I do to understand Claude when we turn the lights off at night. Helen's viewed as being isolated, but she was very in touch with the outside world. She was able to enjoy music by feeling the beat, and she was able to have a strong connection with animals through touch. Helen was catapulted to national fame when she was just 16 years old for being inspirational. That was pretty much it. And by the time she graduated Harvard, she had become internationally well known. Much fairer. She graduated Harvard. She went on to become a speaker and author, advocating worldwide for people with disabilities and other social causes, including women's right to vote, pacifism and birth control. She joined the Socialist Party of America and advocated for revolutionary change, noting the close relationship between disability and poverty, blaming capitalism and poor industrial conditions for both. However, despite her fame and strong politics, she was not taken very seriously. Newspaper columnists who praised her courage and intelligence when she was known purely for being disabled dismissed her politics for those same disabilities. One even wrote, mistakes sprung out of the manifest limitations of her development. To which she replied that the last time they'd met, the compliments he paid me were so generous that I blush to remember them. But now that I come up with socialism, he reminds me and the public that I am blind and deaf, and especially liable to error. I must have shrunk in intelligence during the years since I met him. Oh, ridiculous Brooklyn Eagle! Socially blind and deaf, it defends an intolerable system, a system that is the cause of much of the physical blindness and deafness which we are trying to prevent. Lights gone! These views even landed her on a 1949 FBI list of Communist Party members, although she was a socialist, not a communist, but apparently the FBI don't know the difference. Besides, she wrote on a range of topics, and one of them just happened to be eugenics. More than awkward. Eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that aims at improving the genetic quality of the human population. The idea is to increase the rates of sexual reproduction among people with desired traits, positive eugenics, and reducing the rates of sexual reproduction among people with less desired or undesired traits, negative eugenics. Generally through forced sterilisation, letting disabled babies die, and gas chambers. It began as a popular theory in the early 20th century and quickly spread worldwide. As a theory, it does have some merits, that we see enacted today. If you know there's a particularly vicious genetic disease in your family, you can have your embryos screened, and if you choose, if you want to, only implant those without the disease. That's the only positive I can think of. On the negative side, if this had taken off, I would be dead. I have a genetic disability. Eugenics is not in favour of me living or breeding. We generally think of eugenics as something only the Nazis did, but they actually based their policies on California's laws about eugenics. And they declared that people unfit to reproduce included people with mental or physical disabilities, people who scored low in the IQ ranges, criminals and deviants. It means the gays. And members of disfavoured minority groups. Although the Nazis then decided that they didn't want to wait for future generations to not have the traits that they thought of as undesirable. They just wanted to kill people right away. Also, their idea of undesirable traits were flat out ridiculous. Helen Keller may have been blind and deaf, but she clearly saw a distinction in her mind between Helen Keller and not Helen Keller people. She wrote that our puny sentimentalism has caused us to forget that a human life is sacred only when it may be of some use to itself and the world. And called for defective babies to be allowed to die, partly because she genuinely believed that disability led to a life of criminality. Which probably says something about her own mindset. Was she constantly crushing down her own criminal urges? Because I'm disabled, and I'm not. So, as I mentioned earlier, she was lifelong friends with the eugenicist and inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell. Controversy tangent time! Now, everyone knows that Bell invented the telephone, but most people do not know that he was also a deaf educator, and his methodology continues to cause controversy in the deaf community today. Bell's father was a teacher of the deaf, and his mother was deaf herself. The young Bell would often talk to her by, effectively, yelling at her forehead, in the belief that the vibrations would pass straight through to her brain, which isn't exactly how hearing works. Bell strongly opposed marriage between deaf people, believing that it created too many deaf people, which, again, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, so good luck with that. So Bell, following in his father's footsteps, married one of his own deaf pupils, Mabel Hubbard, and then forced her to only speak and never sign. Great guy. He feared contamination of the human race by the propagation of deaf people, and the creation of a separate deaf race with their own language, culture and society. He presented a paper, Memoir upon the Formation of a Deaf Variety of the Human Race, to the National Academy of Sciences in 1883, in which he wrote that those who believe as I do that the production of a defective race of human beings would be a great calamity to the world will examine carefully the causes that lead to the intermarriage of the deaf, with the object of applying a remedy. What is this remedy, I hear you ask? Removing barriers to deaf-hearing interaction by forcing deaf people to lip read and use their voices, banning sign language, and having legislation to prevent the intermarriage of deaf-mute people, and forbidding marriage between hearing people who are both related to a deaf person. Oh, you think that's all talk? Oh no. Bell ran a school for the deaf, remember? The children would be beaten if they used sign language. Still today, the debate that he started between proponents of oralism, teaching individuals to speak and to lip read, and manualism, teaching sign language in schools for the deaf, continues. This crushing of the culture of a group of people created a wedge that hurts more than it helps. Obviously, since when has destroying a native society ever helped them? It's a really sticky issue where a lot of wealthy hearing people just waded in and thought that they knew what was best. I mean, yes, they believed that without speech, deaf children would never be able to participate fully in society. Their intentions were good, but oh my god, you don't put someone on a committee of eugenics just because they enjoy breeding livestock and they once married a deaf person. True story. Yes, there are some positives, and maybe you think this is a strange thing for a deaf woman who uses her voice, largely relies on lip reading, and is in a deaf-hearing marriage to be talking about. But please do bear in mind that the most important thing is, and will always be, choice. The choice of the deaf person. Oh, I didn't realise I have so much to say about Alexander Graham Bell. This is a video about Helen Keller, so I'm just going to move back to talking about her. If you would be interested in my making a video where I rant about Belle and the dramas of deafness and oralism, then do let me know in the comments and I'll get to work on that. In the meantime, check out Ricky Pointer's channel as she has a lot to say on the topic. And is blocked by the Alexander Graham Bell Association on Twitter. I'm not. Yet. Probably will be after this video. On the subject of Helen Keller and the relationships of deaf people, you might not know that she was not actually unromanced. Like most people, but not all, hey asexuals, Helen wanted love and a life partner. When she was in her 30s, her companion Anne Sullivan became very ill and had to take time away from Helen to rest. Peter Fagan, a 29-year-old reporter for the Boston Herald, stepped in to act as Helen's secretary in her place. The pair fell in love and made plans to marry, but Helen's family vigorously disagreed and crushed the relationship. They felt adamant that marriage and childbearing were not options for a deaf-blind woman. Under pressure from her family and without the support of her companion, Helen gave in and sent Peter away. "How alone and unprepared I feel, especially when I wake in the night," she wrote to Anne. She's remembered for proving that people with disabilities can achieve success and triumph over societal norms. But though she was able to speak up about equality, the rights of others, even speak up in favour of other disabled people's sexuality being recognised, she was not granted that which she sought for. It could also be argued that the image of saintliness and purity that had been thrust upon her is constrictive. To frame her just in that way, claiming that she solved the personal challenge of disability through sheer optimism and perseverance, is to miss the wider issues that she fought to rectify. The controversial parts of her life are brushed over when we learn about her in school. The socialism, the romance, the eugenics, again. But we need to learn about those things in order to see her as a whole human being, as every disabled person should be. And when 1 in 4 disabled adults in America lives below the poverty line, I'm pretty sure her socialist politics are still very relevant. She is more than just an inspiration. She fought for true equality, and she deserves to be regarded equally. She was not all perfect, but she was not all evil either. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you stay tuned for my Christmas-tired videos. Make sure you tune in on Monday though, where there's going to be a vlog of Claude and I buying our Christmas tree. Oh my god, so excited. Bye bye.